was born Amish, is the CEO of the Misfit Amish, an organization they founded to create and provide meaningful and educational resources for survivors, medical, and legal support systems. They are certified in social and behavioral research by the Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative and serves as a researcher and cultural advisor for Lock Haven University, study on child sexual abuse in conservatives Anabaptist communities. They are actively working on publication of a peer-reviewed study on Amish and Anabaptist child sexual abuse with Tara Mitchell, PhD, Lock Haven University, presenting educational information to healthcare providers, domestic violence advocates, and CYS-DYS to bridge the cultural gaps while collaborating with the Plain People's Podcast, other professionals and experts to continue creating resources that will enable Amish and Mennonites to access information that meets them where they are. As an educator and advocate for Amish children, they collaborate with other organizations and agencies to provide research, supported, and evidence-based, best practice-based resources for Amish, Plain communities, and survivors. A medical coder by profession, Byler also holds a master's certificate in life coaching, multiple certifications in trauma awareness, and specializes in working with survivors from cults and conservative sectarian religious groups. Byler was a co-creator of an exhibit in Lancaster County on Amish plain clothing and sexual assault. They produce audio and video recordings of Amish plain survivor stories. Candace has opinions about this, and focusing on LGBTQ survivor stories. Welcome, Mary. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited you decided to come and do a talk. I'm excited. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm excited.
Yeah, we are so happy to have you. I was so excited when Helen told me you were going to come on.
Who has opinions, though? I want to know who has opinions already on the survivors.
It's Helen's cat.
Yeah, it was my kitty. Yeah, she as soon as
your cat.
Yeah, she's got opinions. She jumped up in front of the camera and she's like, "Hey, I got stuff."
I love
I have
it.
very opinionated cats, though. Rob's cat is super opinionated.
Rob's cat is the most opinionated. That cat joins in and talks and gives it back, you know, just as good as anybody.
Well, my cat doesn't join in, but my dog likes to have an opinion sometimes. If you hear a woo, it's my dog. She has a thought.
We support this. This is a pet-friendly space, so feel free to invite them in. But in the meantime, yes, thank you for coming. Your credentials precede you, and I am so glad that you were here to come on and talk about one of the religious groups that in communities that we don't often hear that much about. And I know you were telling us before the show about how a lot of times people don't have a good understanding of these communities at all beyond what they see in the media. So I know you'll tell us more about that in a little bit, but would you care to tell us a little bit about your experience in this community and how you ended up leaving from it?
Well, I usually start this part off by saying my name is Mary Byler. I was born into an Abe Trier Amish church. I went on to live in 4 other older Amish settlements, and that is significant because you have to understand that every settlement has different rules because we have decentralized leadership. In 2004, when I was given the opportunity to do so, I escaped, largely because of the child sexual abuse that I had experienced and that I was witnessing with other people as well. And I reported the abuse that I had experienced. And if you would like, I can read to you from my book how I escaped.
Yes, please. And I will drop a link for that in the chat as well if people would like to see where they can get that book.
And first off, I do want to give you a content warning. I want to let you know that this might be really activating. It might dysregulate some people. If this is too much for you, please seek out support from your trusted folks, your qualified trauma therapist, you know, actual therapists, not the ministry. Highly recommend that. It's very helpful. And also, there's always you can go to the Secular Therapy Project if you would like. Or you need to speak to someone immediately. But with that being said, so February 16, 2004, scene. Riding as a passenger with one of my abusers and a different English van driver present. I smell your breath as you lean in and whisper, I have something for you after this car ride. The overwhelming stench overpowered my senses as I struggled not to retch. I think about the other day when you said, what if we were not brother and sister? What do you mean? My stomach churns, my heart pounds. My breath is fast and quick. Will I survive this? I focused on the radio as we rode in the car. I am alive. I scratch my skin. Yes, I can feel something. I try so hard, and I realize if I don't take this opportunity to run, I will never be safe. I will never be able to keep my sister safe. The rest of the ride home, these things run on repeat through my head. I take my things out of the van mostly. I say hello to my mother, and my sister. I run upstairs and leave a note. I grab my bag and run outside. I hop in the van with the driver, and we take off, blanketed by darkness on a 2-lane road through the countryside in the winter in Wisconsin. We stop to put a letter detailing abuse in one of our church ministry's mailboxes, and I leave my cop, that's the head covering, the white head covering. On the road there, I hop back in and we take off. And even today, as I write about this, my heart pounds, my eyes well up with tears. How narrowly did I escape? And did the actions I took help my sister? Escaping was not my last interaction with my family or the church. Leaving was a sin since I was taking the privilege of being born Amish and treading on it. Eventually, I was put in the Bon, which is a status, and Meidung, which is shunning, is practice. Repercussions were bound to happen, but for the first time in my life, I saw some repercussions for those who deserved them instead of the innocent children before me. For some of that story, check out Sins of the Amish on Peacock TV. Shortly after I escaped, I picked up the phone and called the sheriff's department and reported the abuse I experienced. My mom, my stepfather, and 3 of my brothers were arrested. The information from the interview was sent to Pennsylvania. Charges were never brought against my abusers in Pennsylvania. Thank you. Part of why I want to talk about that is people think we just get to leave. We have a choice. We have an option. We decided to do this. And when we talk about escaping like that, I escaped. There were a lot of details that I did not feel comfortable writing about with that ride. And yes, Freya has opinions. Big opinions. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We did invite pets. We said that was fine. So,
right, Kenneth? Yeah, see?
Yeah. Well, she's got opinions.
Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing that. I know that it is, a very, dark story, and it's hard, for those of us that have experienced that type of abuse. And on top of it, the trauma of having to leave to escape it, that you knew within the community that, like, I'm not going to get any help here. It takes a lot of bravery, but I have to imagine it was also a very terrifying step to decide that, like, I need to save myself and to save my family, my sister. I need to do something.
Because you're facing not only the fact that you're going against everything that you were taught, you are also taking your birthright, you are taking your heritage, and you are stepping on it. You are dishonoring your birthright. You are dishonoring that covenant you were given because you were born Amish. And then, not only that, there's the whole consequence of being placed in the Bon and then shunning being practiced. That's where it's like, okay, so that's what is more than likely going to happen. There's a chance that could happen. And that is absolutely what happened. I was put in the Bon so quick. They didn't even take the time to practice their own rules. They were supposed to come and talk to me before they did it. They didn't. Furthermore, they told an outsider church business, which you actually make a promise when you're baptized to not tell outsiders church business. And they told an outsider church business because they told a neighbor, an English neighbor, to tell me that I'm in the bond.
Oh, wow. So they violated their own rules to tell you. And what does being in the bond mean? A couple of people are wondering about that too. Does that mean that there's been a decision has been made that you're going to be shunned at that point?
Well, they actually have a very formal event, so they're supposed to go talk to you. And then the ministry talks about it amongst themselves. So you have like the bishop, two ministers, and a deacon. And then they come back and they tell you like you're going to be put in the bond. And the bond is a status that now means that they put this bond, they put this proposal to put you in the bond for so many weeks to see if you will repent appropriately, if the ministry has decided that you are repentant enough. And then the church takes a vote on it. But if you disagree with the vote, you can also be disciplined for disagreeing with the vote. So is it really a vote?
Oh, so like if people in the church, like if the majority decides one way, but then there are other people in the church that voted a different way, they can be disciplined for voting against the majority? Oh, yes. How interesting. So it's a foregone conclusion. You have to vote this way or you will be disciplined if you don't.
Or you could face discipline. You could. Absolutely.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a vote.
I've literally seen bishops who were disciplined because of, and this is interesting because some Amish bishops absolutely do like to play God. But, you know, there's been Amish bishops that have been disciplined because he disagreed with the vote of the church.
So someone is asking the same question that was in my mind a moment ago. Is the outcome of the vote predetermined? Like, are they basically instructed, we're going to decide this, do you concur? Or like, how does that work?
They tell you what the ministry thinks. Do you agree with this?
Okay, so it is clear which way you are expected to vote on the issue.
Uh-huh.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that does not sound exactly like voting to me, but all right.
And so it sounds like coercion, just saying. I know, hot
Helen,
take. Hot take.
Interesting. Interesting, because you bring that up. Like, what is this coercion thing you speak of? What is coercive control?
I bet you'll tell us.
I bet you tell us because we're doing the stock.
Well, so
that was a good segue. So what is coercive control, Mary? Please tell our audience.
Well, I would like to say that I feel like I've gotten many major lessons in coercive control.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And is it coercive control when the ministry, like I have a newspaper article with my former bishop, the one who baptized me, his name is Dan Miller. His name is published in newspaper articles from 2004, by the way. But with him, like, 1, calling child sexual abuse, which is a felony. 2, the perpetrator, he is a convicted registered sex offender to this day, and he says he just made a mistake. And then he doesn't understand why. He laments the fact that, oh, we just don't understand why the Amish church can't have control over this. Is that an attempt at maintaining the image and maintaining the branding? Because it always goes back to the money, doesn't it? Somehow.
Now, that's an interesting point that goes back to what you were talking about earlier with people having a very particular idea of what the Amish are like. And I started out thinking that was because people are just ignorant or and I'm including myself in that as well. I am not educated on very much about the Amish community other than what I saw in the movie The Witness.
Oh, and dear.
I'm sure that's not that's the Hollywood version, but it sounds like what you're also kind of telling us is that this is also something that is intentional, that perhaps the community wants to remain private and anonymous and not well known to the outside. Is that the case?
Well, yes, because when you start thinking of the Amish church hierarchy and structure, and then you start thinking about the levels of privilege, which I do have a slide that I want to share with you later, talking about Amish privilege. I guess I could share that right now. It's not really in order. We're just going here. When you start talking about all of that, so to understand what Amish privilege looks like, you have to understand the church structure a little bit and how that operates. So within different settlements, which is a geographical location, you can have different types of Amish. Like as I mentioned earlier, I was talking about how I came from 5 different settlements. And so the sum of all those different Amish experiences is the sum of my Amish experiences while I was a practicing Amish person. But to be Amish, you have to understand it's not just a religion, it's also a business, and there is branding that goes along with it. It is very intentional. Amish are very skilled at creating a facade. And then to maintain that, you have to know that all of these different types of Amish people, they can have different rules. So some people, they might very much they might have chainsaws, they might have tractors. Some people have they have a difference with the Amish community, that or the type of Amish that has they have steel wheels on their buggies and other people don't. Some people have tractors with steel wheels and other people have tractors with rubber tires. Like, it just depends on the settlement, because what do? Our options when we disagree is to go get a group of people and go create a new settlement, and then we don't affiliate or associate with the new settlement properly unless they've done it in Freedy, which is like they're still like they're still like allowed to uh, participate in church activities with the new settlement that has been formed, because they did it out of peace and love, and they weren't intentionally just that wrong. They're not as bad as like some of those other Amish. We're very funny that way.
This reminds me of a little bit of in some of the Protestant church denominations, where there may be splits where people get, very upset about a reading of a particular passage or a certain theological doctrine, or there's drama at the church, and now we've got the Second Baptist Church or the Third Methodist,
right?
Although they're never called that for some reason.
Well, and to be fair, like, there's even Amish Mennonite churches that incorporate ideas from both Amish and Mennonite churches. So when you start talking about Anabaptists, Anabaptist just means we don't believe in infant baptism. However, comma pause, like, as being raised old order Amish, like, we felt some kind of way about people who baptized 8-year-olds.
Okay, so when is there a consensus among the Amish? I'm realizing that's probably not a great umbrella term already, that there's a lot of differences within that, but is there an age that people are supposed to be baptized, or what kind of baptism is it? Tell me everything.
The youngest I've ever seen anybody get baptized was 16, and that was only because they had become pregnant out of wedlock. The rest of the time, it was over the age of 17. Generally, in many settlements, many of the more conservative settlements and types of Amish, they would have an expectation that you would be baptized by the age of 20 or by the age of 18. It just depended. But in some of the more liberal settlements, you could be like 23 and get baptized. It just depends on what type of Amish you are, what kind of family you have. And even then, if you don't get baptized when you should, like my cousin is an Amish bishop, and he says, well, I would just talk to my children until they saw the error of their ways in rejecting the baptism. Not coercive control at all.
No, not at all. Sounds like people have all the choice they need. Oh,
Or
wow.
then when you think about all of these different nuances, and then you start understanding too that there's certain inherent truths about like being Amish, which is like, oh, we're conscientious objectors. Oh, we live maybe a different cultural lifestyle. Oh, we might speak Pennsylvania German, or we might speak Swiss Dutch. Or, and more than likely, many of us go to specifically Amish schools and get an Amish education from an Amish teacher who maybe has qualifications of wearing a good dress. Might be 16 years old, but wears a good dress.
Wow. Now, is
You
there
know,
a certain level of education that people are expected to receive?
Eighth
And
grade.
what is that? Okay. Wow.
Eighth grade. What were
And
you
what
going to say?
happens
why is it?
after
Oh, so
that?
why is it eighth grade? Is it just that you have like the basics of how to understand math and reading, and then afterwards it's like, oh fuck it.
Well,
Like they
it's
don't put any
actually
more.
this is actually, you might be shocked at this, but this is part of the intentional disinformation about Amish people. In 1972, there was a Supreme Court ruling called Wisconsin versus Yoder. The U.S. Supreme Court actually traded off, in lieu of an education for Amish children, what the trade-off was trafficking Amish children for child labor and calling it learning a trade.
Mm,
Oh,
oof.
I see.
So kids are sent straight to work rather than go any further in education for the most part.
Yeah, but that's not
Ooh.
to say that we're not intelligent.
No, that's not
No,
the
no,
same
no,
thing.
no.
We
It's not
we
the same.
we're culturally different. We speak English as a second language, and we operate differently. We
Mhm.
just don't, we're just not dominant culture people, which is like going to the pull, when people think about the whole, um, when I say Amish, like you start talking about the stereotypes. And
Mhm.
part of what we have to understand is that Amish are just people. Some of
Mhm.
them commit crimes. I have many loved ones still within Amish churches. Like that's just the way it is.
Mhm. So
They're just people.
would you like to go over some of the results of the poll,
Sure.
and then we can talk about some of those stereotypes? So
Yeah.
we did ask at the beginning of the poll to answer, with your gut response, whatever came to mind. So no judgment here. This is just hearing what people thought of. So I'll share the results. And I don't think that y'all are able to see the results to the fill in the blank question. I'll read some of those out. But the first question that we asked was, when I say Amish, what's the first thought that comes to mind? And I think the most frequent response that we got out of the answers was some version of horse and buggy. A lot of people thought of that. Several people mentioned something like a conservative or closed off community. Someone said funny hats. Uh, some other people mentioned things like donuts and the oatmeal guy, which I'm not familiar with those references. I don't know if you are. Several people referring to things like plain dress or clothing that reminds them of pilgrims, um,
Mhm.
Christian literalists, and let me see, I think there were a couple of other options here. Oops, sorry, I scrolled down too far. A lot of people were mentioning the clothing style or the horse and buggy or simple life, Quakers, Pennsylvania, farming, hard work, these kinds of things. How does that stack up to your
Well,
impressions?
we got good food here. Talking about the donuts.
So
Let
what
me
is
tell
the
you,
thing with the donuts? I need to know about this. I love donuts.
Oh
I
my
have a
god.
shirt that says donuts and freedom is in rainbow colors because my coming out story is actually about donuts and freedom.
Oh, I love this. Oh, and someone is
Anyways,
saying Quaker oats. Now I get it. Okay, sorry. I was slow on the uptake on that one.
here's here's the thing. You can be plain and you don't have to be Amish. Anybody can live a plain life. Anybody can live like a life without electricity and go off grid. You don't have to be even religious. That's one. Two, like y'all might need a drink for this, but there are many different types of plain people beyond Amish. So when you see plain people, I would challenge you to ask yourself, like, are these really Amish people or am I stereotyping them? Be aware of that. Think about it.
Well, like there's people like in the Quiverful movement, that would be considered plain, so as I've learned more about the different groups, I don't automatically go like, oh, they're Amish. I grew up like we had this conversation where I grew up around, where I lived, not grew up. I lived around a lot of Mennonites. A lot of plain clothing, but also a lot of them wore like everyday clothes. And so it's like it's very silly to like put like, because we all know this, like not everything is monolith, and not every single group is going to fit into a stereotype of what is being presented to you. It's complicated because people are complicated.
Right. And when you have decentralized leadership, it becomes even more complicated. And I would also say that I found it very interesting that somebody brought up the Witness movie. I'd invite you to go listen to the Witness podcast that they remade, like, what was it, last year? Because I actually worked on that podcast. And you might be surprised because part of the issue is that America is in this faith crisis, and it has been. Like, people have been in this faith crisis. They're losing members. People are desperate for some type of just resolution or peace or like a place to go because of all the harms that are being brought to light from specific religious groups. And so they don't know where to turn. And far too often they turn to Amish as like, oh, I can go live Amish. And if I live Amish, then my life will be perfect and everything will be great. Well, I just want to know how many of y'all think these stereotypes kind of align with like some of the trad wife initiatives out there. Do y'all have thoughts?
Interesting. And for anybody that's listening, we're seeing on here, you've listed out several stereotypes that you hear often, including things like peaceful, gentle, good cook, excellent housekeeper, good seamstress, loving, furniture makers, hard worker, builds things, quilter, women love children and find fulfillment raising them, living off the land, farmers, so on. I didn't think of that until you just said that, but yeah, actually that does sound a lot like some of the trad wife language that we hear. So what are your thoughts on these stereotypes?
Well, I think that when people really don't know, often they try to relate to people. And I think that that comes across in many different ways, that we often aren't aware of our own understanding of people. Like, for example, like how many of you know that Amish people descended directly from the Catholic Church by way of the Mennonites? Like, we split from the Mennonites in the late, I believe it was 1693, because Jacob Ammon and his followers, they didn't think that the Mennonites practiced shunning biblically. It wasn't the right way. So that's when we split. That's why we were taught, like as children, we were taught this history orally. And there's a section in our Amish cookbook published by Pathway Publishers that actually talks about this, who we are as Amish people and what happened and why and all of that. And part of what people just know, because we are an insular group, we are a high control group, there is a lack of access. There is a lack of openness that we often practice towards outsiders. They just know, generalizations, and far too often it's overgeneralized. And this happens within many different marginalized people groups. When you think about that, how does this play into people like survivors? Have you ever thought about that? how do we react and respond to survivors? I would say that having been speaking publicly for 20 years, because 20 years ago in July is the first time I was ever published in a newspaper. And 20 years ago, I was at work on my break when somebody came out and said, I figured out who you are. And I said, what do you mean? They hadn't published my name. It was simply a matter of court record because I reported abuse. And they knew who my family was. They figured out who my family was. And so sometimes we take lemons and we make lemonade. And sometimes we are still able to build a life that's meaningful to us. But how do we get there when we have people who tell us like, oh, but that's your mom. Oh, but that's your, you know, Amish are not really that bad. Or you need to forgive. You need to like go ahead and just like heal this way. Like they tell us how we're supposed to heal. How do we navigate that? Have any of y'all ever heard anything like that? Like some of the things like learned helplessness or, weaponized victimhood. Have you ever been told you're a professional victim because you talk about the things that you experience? Because one, we can't go tell other people's experiences. We can't talk about the crimes that they experience unless they are public. Like if somebody writes a book and I read that book, it is perfectly okay for me, as long as like they are out there, to write a review about that book. But it is not okay for me to take, for example, my sister's experiences and write about those and speak about those publicly. That's not mine. That is not my story to tell. But when I talk about the experiences that I had, the bystanders who stood by and watched, and even came to me years later, multiple times, like there's multiple bystanders who knew and suspected and did nothing. When I talk about how we can do better, then I get told things like, you're a professional victim, oh, you're just trauma bonding, or, healing really requires forgiveness. But in the very first chapter of my book, the very first time I ever disclosed the abuse that I had experienced, I was told that I had to forgive. And that to forgive means that he's sorry. And I can never talk about it again. When you have forgiveness weaponized against you, wielded as a tool of the church, how do you manage that? And then when it comes from people external to the church, from other churches, because part of my journey is after I escaped, I went to a bunch of different churches. And I'll tell you what, there's no church I went to more than 6 times. Anybody want to take a gander why?
Ooh, please tell us.
The language they used when they preached from the pulpit. Think about it.
So you recognized it immediately.
When they're sitting there and they're telling people, well, somebody just did this just lost his way. And we just have to forgive them. And if you're that person, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. You were just given extra to carry by God. This is God's gift to you.
Wow, thanks, God.
Wow, yeah. And that's kind of like really fucked up because, okay, then God gave me an abusive childhood. Thanks. Like, that makes it's so disgusting. And you're supposed to be thankful for that,
yes.
Which is, and if you don't forgive, then it's your fault. And that goes into victim blaming. That's a whole other fucking topic we can talk about. But it's this and like when what you said earlier about how the church weaponizes this type of conversations, and then when you want to talk about the experiences that you've had, and you're and they're like, oh, you're a professional victim or whatever. It's like, oh well, no. I'm trying to express something that happened to me. It's because they're being, to me, I'm always like, okay, it makes people uncomfortable, and but that's what you say, like, this is making me uncomfortable, instead of putting the blame onto somebody else, and making it about like, well, you can't share what happened to you because it makes me uncomfortable, and instead of owning that, I'm going to tell you that you're a professional victim, which is gross, because the only way you heal is by sharing your story, and that's part of the path.
Well, and not only that, but then for me, like for example, I mean, I have a very happy block finger. It's very heavy. And here's part of the reason why. Like one time I was discussing the fact that I had and why I felt horrified by the fact that Roe v. Wade was overturned. So I was discussing this in a panel with people who were talking about their experiences as well and why they thought that Roe v. Wade being overturned was horrific, especially for women and AFAB people's bodies, because like at the end of the day, that is literally people who are taking ownership of those bodies. They're saying, no, you can't make decisions. You can't make medical decisions about your body. So I disclose that, like, I don't know how many abortions I've had. I can't tell you. And that's because of abortifacients. And that's because I was Amish. And that's what my Amish mem taught me to do. I am grateful for that. That is the one semblance of bodily autonomy that I got from her, specifically in regards to the abuse that I experienced. And that is the one thing I'm grateful for. And this person said to me, but I'm just looking around at my good Amish furniture and thinking about how much I like it. That is a classic response.
Wow. So these stereotypes that you mentioned, it sounds like they're so ingrained for people that it prevents them from being able to hear you saying that you experienced abuse, that you experienced anything other than these very basic, superficial, and mostly kind of positive seeming stereotypes.
Right.
Wow. And you kind of implied earlier that you believe that is very, very intentional and calculated, even perhaps.
Right.
Wow.
Because then you start thinking about how does society, by and large, how does our justice system treat victims of crimes? How does our society treat victims of crimes? Often we're infantilized. We're told where to go. We're told how to talk. We're told we're not allowed to talk with or to speak with any kind of emotion, because if we speak about emotion, we haven't healed. You need to go heal first before you're allowed to speak. And they devalue our voices. They devalue survivors' voices over and over and over. You see it in cases like Brett Kavanaugh, Brock Turner, over and over and over inside of various institutions. It's not just one group. It happens repetitively. And I think about this too, is so then you have all these people into New Age healing, and I'm sorry if you're into New Age healing, but if you believe that I chose this life and that I chose to be abused as a child, that I chose to be tortured as a child, we are never going to be friends. I do not want your trauma interventions. I did not ask you to send me emails, and I did not ask you to send me inbox messages on social media. I don't want your interventions. Because what message does that send when you tell somebody they chose to be tortured as a child?
I think that leads right back into what you were describing earlier about the use of language to sort of excuse or disguise or minimize the actions of the offenders by putting the sort of the onus onto the people who received the abuse, the survivors. And you mentioned earlier about when we were talking before the show about, well, what kind of language would, instead of that, empower people to build their own support network and to, I think you mentioned, rescue themselves. What do you think would be the difference if that language that you talked about wasn't here? What would good language sound like if we were centering the survivors and their own empowerment rather than disempowering or blaming or silencing them?
I actually have a whole album on my Facebook, believe it or not, talking about some of the different languages that we can use to empower, to not even just empower, but also to meet survivors where they are. Like sometimes you really have to think about where the person is. You have to approach it with curiosity. You also have to decenter yourself. Like if somebody's telling me about their experience, perhaps it might not be the right time to talk about how much I love that people group. Perhaps, I mean, it's one with things. Like maybe you could say something like, that sounds really awful. What can I do to support you? And if they say no, nothing right now, you can always say, like, I'm just letting you know I'm here. I'm in your corner. I'm here for you. I will support you. And if you ever think of something, let me know. I will help you. I will do my best to support you if it's within my realm of capabilities of doing. I'm not saying that people need to go outside their own capabilities, but I am saying perhaps people need to challenge the way that they approach survivors. One of the things that we really need to work towards is using strength-based language, and also teaching survivors that they're capable of making good decisions. When you start talking about trauma survivors, like trauma is trauma is trauma, and then you have religious trauma, I truly actually will I have to ask if like religious trauma survivors all have like CPTSD. Like I have to ask sometimes. I ask myself that. I can't say, I don't know. Not a doctor. However, when you think about it, how insidious the indoctrination and grooming is from birth, especially for people who are born into it. They're taught all of these things, and then they have to sit there and they have to challenge, they have to examine, why do I hold this belief system? Does this belief actually serve me? Is it something I wish to discard? Have you ever examined where that belief came from? Like, do you actively think about and consciously think about what it is that you're saying to people? For example, as an example, if you say somebody is unforgiving or forgiveness gives healing, one of the things you could say instead is, you've been through a lot, forgiveness is always a personal choice. However, some people do find peace and resolution in unforgiveness. And have you ever considered that some people might even view forgiveness as an act of unforgiveness as an act of grace for the perpetrators of abuse? No one can ever tell you how to navigate your journey because you know what is best for you. I support you regardless of whether you forgive or not. Take that pressure off of somebody regarding whatever it is that they're facing and let them know that you are their ally.
I love that so much. I am so glad you brought that up because that is one of my pet peeves. And it's one of those things that if you're brought up in a culture, in a belief system where forgiveness is kind of the ultimate virtue, where, you know, oh, this is what God and Jesus or whoever the deity is has bestowed upon you, and this is something that you're required to do. It's, you know, first of all, like you said, it just basically serves to say, okay, oh, you spoke out about something bad that happened to you. Well, you have to stop now. You have to forgive. It's over. The end. We're never speaking of this again. But also, it's really hard to shake off that guilt if someone's saying you have to forgive. Are you going to be unforgiving? Are you going to be unlike our deity who we worship? Are you going to be a bad person? And I don't know about you, but I mean, that was something I experienced, was having to kind of think about that. Oh, yeah, where did that belief come from? Who says you have to forgive people? Why? Tell me why.
And who says that's the right way to support people? If our communities of origin taught us that to support people is to tell them to forgive somebody, what makes that the right belief?
It kind of amazes me because, like, how, like, when you learn what a healthy, not only apology, but what that path to redemption looks like, that it's done healthily when you do it wrong, and then you do the steps for the person to be like, okay, you know what, I can see that you're being a better person. But when we're talking about abuse, we're talking about abuse, and no one asks to be abused, and no one, if you want, if as part of your healing journey that you decide to forgive someone, that's your choice. If a part of your healing journey that you don't forgive someone, that's your choice. There is no right or wrong answer here. You have to navigate it on your own. And I think that with religion, it's sort of this idea that, well, if you forgive the person, then the problem goes away. You're not traumatized anymore. It's like it's magic potion. It's just magic words.
It completely negates the actual effects of trauma, and specifically childhood trauma. If you've experienced childhood trauma, and to be clear, when I talk about trauma, what I'm really talking about, anything that overwhelms your central nervous system. If you have experienced repetitive childhood trauma, what can happen is it can arrest development. And right now they're actually looking to, and they're trying to add to the DSM, a diagnosis of developmental trauma disorder. Have either of you ever heard of that?
I have heard about this being discussed. Is this related to sort of repetitive exposures to like adverse childhood experiences?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us more about that.
Well, I just know that they're working on it, and it differs slightly from the diagnoses of like PTSD, and I'm excited to see what they come up with. I did put a link in the document if you want to share that with the group. But ultimately, it can be helpful to understand how trauma actually affects you. And this is not an in-depth breakdown, but ultimately it can rewire your brain. And especially if you've experienced repetitive traumatic events. So that whenever you see something or you hear something that sounds familiar, or it tells your brain that you are unsafe, your brain's like immediately in fight, flight, freeze, fawn, etc. mode. And that can actually be invoked simply through words sometimes. Like the last time I went to a church service, I actually walked out of the church halfway because the preacher was preaching something about, victims playing a part in their abuse. And that was just a little too far for me.
Wow.
So I walked out mid-service. I was like, no, I'm not safe here. This is not a safe place for me. Bye.
No, that doesn't sound like that's a safe place for anybody if that's the kind of thing they're talking about there. Wow.
And that was in 2007. I'm really proud of myself for that.
Good for you. Good for you.
That was not a good thing. But it was a good thing because it was like me saying, hey, I felt like I still had to be a religious person. I still had to believe. I still had to do all these things. And so I felt like to be a good parent, I had to find a church. After I gave birth, I went to a church. That is the church I went to. I was like, I don't want to raise my child in this church. I don't want to raise my child in a church at all. Bye.
Well, good for you for recognizing that and seeing that. Wow, that must have been awful. Well,
But
okay, so, oh no, go ahead.
but then what can happen is that, when people actually get like actual trauma therapy, for example, I've had EMDR therapy. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that, ever had it, experienced it. I don't care. It's none of my business. Your medical care is not my business. And that's another thing that often people ask invasive questions. And it's like sometimes people who have experienced so much trauma as children, even if it wasn't physical violence, even if it wasn't sexual violence, even if it wasn't church abuse specifically, if they have experienced so much trauma, like people really freeze in that moment and they're unable to say no. And so even when people think they're doing a good thing, and I'll give you an example, um, like let's say somebody shares some of their experiences and how they've been finding their voice and they're really proud of themselves for talking about what they can and then setting boundaries about what they're unwilling to talk about. And somebody pipes in and says, "Oh, I'd encourage you to write a book." Do you think that's helpful or harmful in that moment? I can't hear you, Kara.
Yes, I was muted, sorry. Which was right on topic because I was about to say my response to that would be like, wow, did you just hear what I said? And
Yeah.
no, no, because I was muted, but also no, because that response would not make someone felt heard.
So then
Wow.
how can you better respond to that? It's like, well, thank you for being vulnerable with me. Thank you for sharing me. Thank you for speaking. Thank you. And if you feel like it could help you to write about your experience or to share your experience, I want you to know that I will support you. But also, I want you to know that even if you never, ever, ever speak about it publicly, you don't owe the world your experiences. You don't owe anybody your experiences. How you make sense of what happened to you and how you make peace with it is your business. And I'm going to be here either way.
I love that. Can you just like come talk to everyone? Can we just call you and be like, Mary, please talk to me?
No, no.
Yeah. Thank you for setting a
Mary's
boundary.
like, nope, above my pay grade. Nope.
That's way above my pay grade right now.
I love that. But
Yeah, we
there
do
are
want to
so
remind
many
people
people.
that Mary is an advocate and well educated, but she is not a therapist. They are not a therapist.
Hashtag.
So just hashtag
Hashtag
not a therapist.
not a therapist.
Hashtag not a
I joke
therapist.
about this all the time. I'm not a therapist, not a doctor, and I'm not a lawyer. So when people ask me advice, what do I do? Oh, what can you do? If it is something that is not in your lane.
Ooh, that is an excellent, excellent
Oh,
topic.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Preach. Please stay in your lane, y'all. Okay, Mary, let's talk about that. Let's talk about for people that want to support others. How can they do that effectively by staying in their lane?
number one, you know your lane. Number two, you can take courses. There are literally free advocacy courses that are actually like victim witness courses online that you can take to learn a little bit better about how you can serve people who have experienced crimes. And when you start talking about crimes, one of the things that you can really do is you can make referrals. For example, if somebody is talking about being lonely, okay, do you feel comfortable sharing your physical location with me? Are you comfortable? Would you like me to find you some local resources that maybe you could go meet up with people just for the sake of meeting up because you have a commonality, like you enjoy coffee with these people, or you enjoy picking up trash at the park, or, there's all kinds of events out there that you can help people find. Would you like me to help you find a therapist? What kind of therapist do you want? There's the Secular Therapy Project. Yes, I have referred many people to that, by the way.
Thank you.
And
yes.
If it's a lawyer, well, can I help you look around for a lawyer? Always, always, always give them a choice, because when you tell us what to do over and over and over and over again, and you're taking away our choices again, when people cannot, they cannot say no. You are taking away their choices again by telling them what to do, because now they feel compelled, whether that's because of the ingrained misogyny and patriarchal authority, or that's because of the ingrained respect for elders, or that's because of the ingrained respect for people who are telling them what to do, to where they really don't have a say in their own life. Give them a choice. If you want to give somebody a hug, ask before you do that. Ask.
Yes,
ask.
Please.
And you know, for the love of everything, please stop going around saying I'm your family now. You're not my family. You didn't replace my family of origin. While I have chosen family and I have people I love very dearly in my life today, they are chosen by me. It's not some random people who 20 years ago or 15 years ago got to know me a little bit and decided I was their family. Give people choices, because when you give them choices, literally, can I make you a cup of coffee? Can I bring you a gift card? How can I help you? But give them a choice and put the ball in their court. The thing is you will have people that will not ever reach out to you for help, and that's fine, because you are respecting their bodily autonomy and their personhood, and you are empowering them to make the decisions for their own life that matter to them.
I am so glad that you brought this up. This is a conversation I've had recently with other people, talking about how when people do this, even if they think they're being helpful, when someone is saying something like, oh, well, you need to go speak to this type of expert, or you need to take this intervention or that thing, in addition to all of the things you said, doesn't that also kind of contribute to this feeling of, oh, and if you don't take my advice, you're doing something wrong, and now this is your fault, and this is on you?
And that even leads into this, when you start talking about the us versus them mentality. Like, I always feel like I had it a little bit easier because I was Amish and we didn't evangelize. And I'm gonna say this, like, I really have a bone to pick with evangelicals.
Preach.
They're condescending, self-righteous, holier than thou art preaching and BS is utterly despicable. And it harms not only themselves, it harms their children, their communities, it harms everybody around them. You can literally have I have never, ever in my wildest dreams did I ever think that somebody could be so self-righteous in their glass houses. It is egregious.
I know what you're talking about. Have experienced it, and it can be infuriating. And to be clear, that's not everyone that came from an evangelical background, but that is a theme. That is absolutely a style of preaching, and I think you're exactly right. It either puts people off, or the people that have grown up in it can grow up feeling like that is the appropriate way to talk to other people. And then even when they're trying to be empathetic, and may find themselves repeating that type of language, and that is not helpful.
And then
Don't be
they
condescending.
say stuff like, but did you keep the faith? Do you still pray? Are you still a believer? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I am talking about crimes against children. And your response is to ask me if I have faith. What is the goal of that? Do you have thoughts about that, Kara?
Yes, I do have thoughts about that. I think that that's one of those ways of speaking that people learn and don't realize the harm that it
Mhm.
causes, especially if it's something that's been modeled to them by ministers, parents, and authority figures. If this is the way that I'm being spoken to, then, this is the right way to speak to other people. And it's not. This is not something that helps people who have been harmed to hear that tone of voice or that implication that, oh, but listen, if you just hear from me, someone who knows nothing about what you're describing, I'm going to give you some platitude or some simplistic answer about, well, what about the silver lining? But did you thank God? This is not helpful. And I know people who speak in these kind of ways and
Mhm.
they mean well. It does not go over well. This is not good language for someone who's experienced an abuse. And I love that you're telling us all of these tips and alternative language choices. I'm going to have to go back and watch this and write a bunch of those down. Do you have that somewhere? Is that a list? Do you have suggested phrases that people can use instead of the ones that they learned perhaps in their families of origin or from their faith communities when they were younger?
I actually have on my Facebook profile a collective community project, as I mentioned. I can put a
Mhm.
link in the chat if you would like.
Please. Yes, that would
Please.
be wonderful.
I'm going to put my pop psychology hat on for just a second. I wonder also too, because in these, like, when you come from these very like evangelical Baptist like religions, I think part of that too, the way it's modeled is that if anything bad is happening, like, let's deflect it. Like, everything is about the positive imagery, like God is great, nothing bad can happen under God. We are God's chosen people. And then when someone starts talking about like child sexual abuse, the instinct is like, well, if I admit this is happening, if I bring this into my life, then this image, this, we are above reproach. And also as well, the positivity, like, toxic positivity that comes with religion gets tarnished. And that's hard for people because they now have to deal with a very serious crime with people that belong to their church, and it's coming up against like, well, this is my identity, this is who or where I get that positive affirmation from, and that cognitive dissonance. So they'll start pontificating, like, well, did you, maybe if you ask God, he'll help you through this. And well, pastor so and so, he can't be that bad, and it's that uncomfortable deflection that happens over and over again.
And that's kind of gaslighty. I mean,
Yeah.
again, hashtag not a therapist, but that sounds
Right.
kind of gaslighty to me. And it also sounds like it's derailing the conversation. And it's also this at this point, what you're mentioning, Helen, it's usually when people start in with these no true Scotsman fallacies about,
Yeah.
oh, that's not a real Christian. Well,
Right.
I hope we can all recognize that statement for what it is. They're trying to distance themselves from something that calls them to action. They're trying to distance themselves from something that says, hey, this is causing real harm to real people, to real children. I've literally been listening to stories of child sexual abuse since I was 12 years old.
And Mary, I'm on your Facebook page from the link you just put, and I am loving these comparisons of language that you have here, where it's showing how something would be phrased from a perspective that is deficiency based versus strengths based. These are great, where they're talking about things like, here's one, someone might say, you're codependent. That would be the deficiency based option. And then the strength based instead might be something like, look at all these really intelligent ways you kept yourself safe. Like,
Right.
wow, how different are those two statements?
It's kind of like when you start talking about like the people who said to me, "Well, that's your mom. You have to." There were people who literally did not believe me until they witnessed how my mother actually treated me. And they said that over and over and over until they actually witnessed it. And then they were more horrified than I was by how she treated me. And part of how I look at that is like they were horrified. But here's the thing, to understand why she did what she did and why she committed the crimes she did, you have to understand she was indoctrinated from birth. Not only was she indoctrinated from birth, she was taught that this is what it means to be a good Amish woman. Proximity to power often gives people a semblance of safety. If I do this and I do these things to stay alive, I will not experience the same harm that that person experienced. It's also typically the same people who hold the viewpoint that if you were abused, well, you must have did something or you played a part in the abuse. They hold that viewpoint, but they fail to understand and recognize that anybody can be a victim of crime. Any child can be a victim of crime. You don't know. But if you see signs of abuse, then it behooves us all collectively to work towards safety for children.
Yes, that should be uncontroversial.
And when we're talking about this, part of the ways in which we have to do this is we have to collectively get together and we have to talk about the ways we talk about abuse. We have to talk about how we respond to survivors. We have to think about what we're actively saying and why we're saying it.
Those are excellent points. And as we're getting closer to time to go to Q&A, I know you had some slides you were showing. Were there any other slides or other points you want to share before we go to questions?
Oh, actually, let me just go here. How much time do we have?
We can do 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay. Let me see if I can.
I told Mary that they're going to have to come back for a part 2 because there's a lot of content that we did not get to, and there's some really good stuff. So I'm just letting you all know.
Yeah.
How much? I'm telling Mary to come back and do another talk.
Well, and we can have a little bit of flexibility too. How much time do you have left to spend on some of these points? Because you're making great points. I want us to get to as much content as we can.
We should probably stick with the timeline. That is what I've planned for.
Perfect.
Thank you though. But yeah, like going back to that, part of that is also understanding privilege. So when you talk about privilege, you have to really consider inside of even marginalized people groups, you can have people that have different privilege. So when I was talking about the different types of Amish settlements and the privilege, one of the things I learned from being in the Army was how to describe like this hierarchical control, and it taught me something about my Amish experiences. The levels of experience I experienced could best be described as follows. Some settlements have a bishop who is widely known and held in esteem of the entire settlement, or even the type of Amish might have a bishop like that. A little lower on the scale of privilege, you might have your church district's ministry, steering committee members, book club members, book society members, I digress. Affluent families, good families, founding families, families from certain original bishops. Every group of people has a middle class, of course. These are average people who are rule followers that often might not be able to engage in the same activities as the more privileged families. And beneath these people, you have people who may have gotten caught breaking the rules a few too many times. They're closely monitored. Their lives are vastly different from those who live with higher levels of privilege. And lastly, you have the people who are the most marginalized within. These are the people who are on the lowest level of privilege, from families that struggle to sometimes disabled, sometimes widowed, sometimes people who needed church assistance for tragedies such as medical care, an accident, or a fire, or, anybody who was adopted or joined in. You may never accomplish the same status as anyone born into these kinds of groups. Women also might often have rules applied differently to them than men. Even if they are more privileged than other women, they may still have rules applied to them that affect them negatively, disproportionately, and sometimes it is access to healthcare and other necessary resources. People who live with disabilities may also experience the rules being applied differently. Some might even view people with disabilities as a punishment of the parents for the perceived sins the parents may have committed. People who are joined in and happen to be Black or brown have often been told to leave when they reach marriageable age, as they cannot mix the races, according to some Amish. Understanding the diversity within different sects of Amish, as well as the hierarchy of privilege and how the rules might be applied, are ways you can connect better with people. Because if you think about them as just people, and they have similar issues and similar privilege levels and similar society structures, they're just different from a different culture. And we have a different relationship with electricity. Then you might feel like maybe I might have more in common with people, and maybe I can stop talking about all of these things that I want my token Amish friend to talk to us or to teach me or to talk to me about. Then it might be very helpful for you. One of the stories that I like to tell is actually a story about one of my friends who I've known her for a decade, and even though she was curious, she's never asked me to teach her about baking or canning or cooking or cleaning or any of the other stereotypes. And I've also, or even asked me to teach her to bake bread. That's never been an option. She never even asked me why I left or how I left. And the thing is she knows why I left. She knows why I escaped. She knows why. And why is that? Because when I felt safe, I shared what I wanted to share on my own terms. And you might be surprised at how many people will tell you things if they feel comfortable and safe enough to actually engage in meaningful discourse with you.
That is an excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up. You do not owe people a story just because they're curious about it. Your trauma is not for other people to consume. Good grief.
Hey, like, people. Hey.
They said Google it right.
Your friend.
my trauma is
Google's
not
your friend.
Entertainment. My trauma is not for your entertainment. If you want to know more, you can go read my book. You can watch a documentary series about me. You can listen to podcasts I've done. You can do all of these things, but my trauma is not for your entertainment. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is an excellent point. If you remember one thing from this evening, it is that. But yeah, we do have a few more minutes if you want to share any other points. The floor is yours.
Well, I have like 2 videos embedded in this.
Yes.
One is me, yours truly, talking about education, or I don't know if y'all have interest in that education, but it kind of goes into Amish counselors. Good evening, folks. Oh my. As I'm sitting here drinking my tea, I thought I might spill some. So in today's episode of me spilling some tea, we're going to talk about how do people become an Amish minister or deacon. 1, the church will, that means all baptized members of the church, because that's a whole other story. But all baptized members of the church will nominate people that they think would make good ministry, and then the existing ministry will take a book for each person, book that's similar to this, except double the size. For each of the nominated people, men, because women are not allowed to serve in the ministry, one of the books will have a piece of paper in it, similar to this. The man who pulls that book with the piece of paper becomes your new minister or deacon. When you're making a bishop, typically similar process, except the only people that can be nominated are going to be people that are already ordained in that church. And again, whoever pulls the book with a piece of paper is the one that becomes the new bishop, and he's supposed to lead the church. So inside of most Amish communities, the ones that I've encountered and the ones that I've lived in, you go to Amish school, and inside of Amish school, the curriculum is heavily moderated by the church itself, only church approved. materials, content. I went to 5 different Amish schools in 3 different Amish communities. I had books that had pages ripped out. I had books that had pages stapled together, pages glued together, and a blackout marker used over pages as well. There's no health sciences taught, there's no science taught, and the only requirement for the teachers is that they are a member of the church in good standing. And inside of most Amish communities, at least the ones I'm familiar with, there's this requirement that if you need counseling, you should go to your ministry for counseling. So my question is, how can these ministers and deacons and bishops even be qualified to lead a church, let alone counsel people, if they've never had any formal education to, one, be a pastor or minister? Good evening, folks.
Oh my God.
There's this requirement that if you need counseling, you should go to your... Can these ministers and deacons and bishops even be qualified to lead a church, let alone counsel people, if they've never had any formal education to, one, be a pastor or minister or deacon or a bishop, and the only education they've had is that? Thank you. Have a good night.
What do we think?
Thank you for sharing that. And I am going to link, I'm also going to put your links in the chat too, so people can watch your other content. But that is a very interesting topic that I wouldn't have known anything about that process or how those decisions are made, but that scares me.
It scares you?
Yeah. This idea of like your knowledge and your education is being controlled. And what I'm interested in is how you became aware of that, and how would someone become aware of that from within that context?
Well, I was a very bad Amish person. I have never, ever, ever pretended to have been a good Amish person. But see, like, I actually write this whole thing out in my book, how like I finally reached out to somebody external to the community when I was 19 years old about the abuse I had experienced. And that person, one, like, for example, and I'm going to use this person as a token, this was an English man. Yes, English means dominant culture, American. And he actually said, "Hey, can I talk to my girlfriend about this?" He made the time. I wouldn't even talk to him until, one, I had known him for years. Two, I made him promise that he wouldn't tell anybody in the community. He wouldn't tell my family. He wouldn't tell anybody. He could not tell anybody before I would talk to him. So remember confidentiality and privacy. He asked me, he said, "Can I talk to my girlfriend? Because sometimes my girlfriend helps people who are in situations like yours." And I finally agreed to that. And he went and talked to his girlfriend. His girlfriend connected me with a crisis intervention center. And I went and got EMDR therapy as a 19-year-old Amish kid.
Wow. Good for you.
And when they exerted pressure on me to go to the Amish ministry for counseling, my counselor asked me this, my therapist, my actually qualified trauma therapist, you know what my counselor said? What qualifies them to provide therapy for you? I will never forget. I can literally see the couch right now. That was like what?
Wow. Incredible.
It was the best question ever.
Yes, I love that. And
That's
it
a great
sounds
question.
like you were already thinking, and you were asking yourself questions as well. And maybe that was the question that you needed to hear to get to that point. But good for you. And we have got to get to Q&A as well. Speaking of questions, this has been fantastic and thought-provoking, and I have definitely taken away some tools and ideas for how to say things better or less harmfully, maybe is a better way to put it. So thank you so much for sharing this with all of us. And yeah, like Helen said, we are definitely going to have you back on and talk more about this. But we've got questions. Can we, are you ready to go to questions?
Sure.
Okay. So
Cool.
let's see here. Let's see, what do we have? So someone was asking, we kind of already talked about what Anabaptist is, so I'll pass by that one. But someone was asking, when you were mentioning about some of these stereotypes sounding kind of similar to this kind of trad wife thing that's been trending lately, what do you think about that? From your perspective, coming from this sort of situation that is often stereotypically assumed to be that way, but maybe isn't or is different from people's assumptions. How do you feel about this very kind of sanitized and popularized trad wife thing, and why do you think that's trending right now?
What do I feel about that?
Yeah,
If
what do
I
you feel
wanted to
about
be a fucking piece of property, I would have stayed Amish. Other people might find some kind of value in it, but I would say sometimes I have to wonder how many of those women who romanticize that ideology have been groomed just like I was, and they believed it. How many of them have ever had the opportunity to go explore the world and to build a meaningful life for themselves?
It's a heavy question. Oh.
And do they have the resources to go outside of that ideology? Are they trying to take lemons and make lemonade with it? I don't know. I can't speak for them because obviously, like I said, I made a very bad Amish.
I love it, but I feel like that gave you a capacity to have a very compassionate response to that, though, too.
I don't think it's the right answer to demonize them. I really don't. I don't think we should demonize Amish people. Amish are just people. People who are engaging in tradwife things, maybe they've been groomed. You don't know. You don't know why these people are engaging in it. You have no idea. We don't know what they've experienced in life or why they might be seeking that out.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I realized after I said that, I phrased that very poorly. I should have just said, you have a very compassionate response. I am not going to assign a reason for why you have that capacity.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for helping me say things better.
You had a more compassionate response than I did. So we were talking about trad wives. So I'll own it.
Yeah. So. Well, let's do another question. I think we've got time for one or two more. Yeah. Helen, give us a question.
I have a question. Here we go. So is there a difference the ways that boys and girls are educated within the Amish?
Oh boy, do we ever.
First goody.
Remember when I said rules might be applied differently?
Yes.
How many of you have ever heard of the sacred subjects?
Tell us. I see you have literature.
Yeah, Catholics don't have that.
This is literally Amish propaganda to a boy of 12 and to a girl of 11. To a girl of 11 says, don't climb up on ladders. I mean, like, among other horrendous things, says, don't climb up on ladders in front of your brothers, lest, you induce your brother to sin. Okay.
Oh my God, that's gross.
This is in writing. This is in writing.
Gross.
I read from this book in Sins of the Amish. To a boy of 12, fearmongers, and both of them fearmonger about like worldly people, English people. You shouldn't have great fears if you have faith and you follow the instructions. Okay, this is an instruction manual. There's actually 8 booklets in the series, but these are sacred subjects. So to a boy of 12 tells boys of 12 not to engage in sexual activities with farm animals. And also, there are men out there to be afraid of. They are homosexuals.
Wow.
Do you think there's a difference?
Wow, that's
the choices that were made to make those pamphlets. Wow.
Written by an Amish minister, published by Pathway Publishers. That is an Amish publisher.
That's insane.
Yes. I mean, it is an extreme example, but it is a documented example. These have been in circulation since 1985 for sure, that we can prove, because I have an advertisement from The Budget, which is an Amish newspaper from 1985, advertising these booklets.
I have a question. Are children educated together, or is it like
together?
Boys are educated and then girls they're separated? Like, is it co-ed or is it?
It's co-ed.
No, it's co-ed. Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's another question. You've mentioned a few times this evening about, being careful about thinking of, the stereotypes that people have, and instead think about, okay, this is a cultural difference. This doesn't mean that, people's lives and experiences are necessarily hard to understand, but there's a cultural difference living in an Amish community versus what you described as an English community, which you said that refers to basically not Amish people. Is that right? Is that what that means?
Yeah.
Okay. So I learned that in that movie, The Witness.
See that movie.
Yes.
Oh, Lord.
And so someone was wondering, when you left your community, to what extent did you experience culture shock, and how long did it take you to adjust and adapt?
Oh, dear. How much time do you have?
We've got about 5 minutes.
Okay. Let me just put this out there. My friends tell me it's not that I'm technologically impaired. And in fact, on the Misfit Amish blog post, the last blog post is a letter from the Amish Book Society that is attempting to get the technology in their schools in their homes and their businesses under control.
Oh, under control. The technology is out of control. Oh, do tell. What does that look like?
Well, basically, the Book Society is saying that if like these children have these issues continuing with the technology, it's interfering with schooling. And if these children continue to have these issues, the parents will be talked to by the school board and the Book Society. And then if they don't come into compliance, they will take it to the ministry. And then if they still don't come into compliance, the children will be expelled from school, because we're always going to make our most vulnerable people pay the price.
Yeah.
And so, like, what are the kinds of things that are going on? Is it the kind of thing where over time, things that maybe types of technology that were not acceptable 50 years ago are now? Like, is there a general trend towards more technology being okay, or like how does that work?
It depends on the settlement. It really depends on the settlement and the type of Amish. As far as like assimilation, I mean, I'm a little pop culture impaired. That's the best term to describe it. Like, I don't have the same relationship with movies as the rest of y'all. The only movie that I will watch willingly is one that doesn't traumatize me, and that's The Last Unicorn, and that's why we talked about The Last Unicorn.
I love that. And you know what? We need to see who won in that poll. A lot of people did not pick an answer for that. Wow, y'all, a lot of people have not seen The Last Unicorn, folks. Okay.
I haven't seen it since I was like 7, so I didn't remember any of the characters. So I apologize.
Fair. It could be that people didn't remember which characters were which, but the two that got selected were Molly Grew and Schmendrick. Which one would you have picked, Mary?
Molly.
Ah, I love it.
There's a whole reason why though, because like Molly like looks at Amalthea and she's just like, where were you? Where were you when I was young?
Yeah. Oh. I like that. Okay, well now everyone's homework is to go watch The Last Unicorn.
Yep.
Or rewatch The Last Unicorn. Yeah, someone's saying the first time I heard of The Last Unicorn was 2 hours ago. Oh, there we go.
Oh,
Glenda's showing up for us.
Thank you. Thank
you too. And I have, and on, you can't hardly see it, I have Schmendrick is with you. I painted on the bottom of it. But yes, I made this in 2007.
Oh, I love that so much. That is an excellent unicorn likeness.
It's the one in the favorite. It's my favorite.
That's amazing. I love, this is one of my favorite things about when we do episodes is when our guests share with us their pop culture passion, their movie, their book, their film, their show. I love getting to know people that way. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, and I'm excited to go rewatch it now with this conversation in mind.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to rewatch it with and channel my 7-year-old Helen self.
Yes, so for sure. All right, well, it is about that time in the evening for us to wrap up and have some final words and go to the hangout. Now, Mary, I know we have taken up much of your evening. Do you want to stick around for the hangout? Do you need to log off? Totally your call.
Let me just take a little break and I will come back for the hangout.
Perfect, no problem.
That's fine. This is a good time to take a break.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, and we will look forward to that. So we'll just wrap up real quick, just like always. Thank you to everyone for coming and hanging out with us and doing the show with us. And thank you, everyone, for making it happen. We do this through the work of a lot of dedicated volunteers behind the scenes as well as on screen. And we're here because people keep showing up. So thank you to everyone. And because people keep helping us put this on the internet, too. So thanks to everyone for that. And don't forget to join us next week, same time, same channel. We'll be here again. We're switching around topics for next week, so stay tuned for the ad for that one. It'll be a little bit of a surprise. And then the following week is Rob's talk. Are humans actually special in the universe? So that is the question we will be pondering. And maybe Rob will tell us in advance if we need to watch any movies or films beforehand.
Make sure you're keeping track of who has more talks, David Teach Out or Rob. Make sure you got your tally going.
No contest. It is. I bow to David.
It's a playful contest.
It is. It's a fun contest. And let's see. Where else can people find us on the interwebs, Helen?
So you are all media savvy people. So please go to we have a Facebook main page, which all the announcements of what's going on with Recovering from Religion are there. We also have a Facebook support group page. So if you're looking for a support group, go to that page. The artist, formerly known as Twitter, you're going to go there. And you're going to find out more what's going on with RfR. If you're on X, if you're not, I totally got it because I'm not there either. If you're on Instagram, please go to Instagram. We are on there as well. And we're also on TikTok. So go on TikTok. You can see Gail talk about her wonderful life in TikTok world and talk about RfR. So go do that as well. And also, if you cannot get enough RfRx into your ear holes, and you want more in your ear holes and your brain, what you want to do is you want to go to our YouTube channel and you're going to click and subscribe and you're going to look all over the content and you're going to be like, this topic looks really interesting. Or if you see a topic that might piss off your, very bigoted uncle that it doesn't want to listen to you, but it's like, why are you leaving religion? You can send it to him. And that helps us as well. Okay. Hey, Cara.
Yes.
Why don't you tell the people why we volunteer?
That is a great idea.
I know.
because we like it here, and volunteering at Recovering from Religion makes you 20% cooler when Helen's around.
I am the arbiter of coolness.
Yeah, we have learned that. But also it's because we've learned that healing can also come from helping others, and it doesn't have to be from forgiving people. It can be from helping other people through a difficult time. And a lot of our volunteers do find meaning and purpose by volunteering with us. And all of those services that we talked about earlier in the program, like the support groups and the online community and the helpline and editing the videos that go on the internet and finding the resources and all of those things, those are all supported by our staff of volunteers. So we are always in need of more volunteers who can help us make more great content for people and find more resources for people and answer more chats and calls and have more support groups. So if you have the time, the inclination, if you have a skill or ability that you would like to put to good use, we can use you. You don't have to do something that is like front facing. You certainly can if you want to. If you are really good at answering phones and talking to people or answering chats, please help us do the helpline. If you are really good at behind the scenes things like looking through resources and finding good ones, helping us edit videos, doing IT, we need help with that too. If you can make web pages, call us. Actually, go to our webpage, recoveringfromreligion.org/volunteer. Go straight there, and we would love to hear from you. I'm going to drop the link in the chat here, but just go to the website, recoveringfromreligion.org, and click on the volunteer tab, and you can read all about becoming a volunteer, and there is an application form you can submit right there online, and somebody will get in touch with you to talk more about it. So we would love to see you there. And with that, I will turn it over to our lovely executive director, Gail Jordan, JD, right?
Esquire, yes, thank you.
Esquire, yes. Oh, yeah, that is your name from now on this program.
Oh my God, I'm going to use it now.
Very, very special, very pretentious name for a lawyer. Yes, Esquire. You can just say counselor. Maybe that'll do. Kara, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for all those lovely things that you just said about volunteering. Mary said something that had such an effect on me when she was doing her presentation about you don't have to wait to be healed before you speak. The same applies for volunteering. We would like to apply that same thing. You don't have to get there. You don't have to be there. Some of us are still on our journey. Most of us are still on our journey. It's often not an event as much as it is a process. And so you don't have to be there to turn around and reach a hand behind you. So let me remind you of that, but let me also remind you what Mary said. They also said that you don't know the world, your experience, which is sort of a dichotomy there, right? Because we want you to, if your experience has led you to want to talk about it, and that's how you process it, you get to do it that way. If your experience has you in a place that you're not ready or you don't want to talk about it, you get to do that too. And you don't owe anybody an explanation. That's one of the things that we talk about here at Recovering from Religion is respect for everyone's process, respect for everyone's individual process. So if you would like to join us on our volunteer team, we would love to have you. Now, I know that Mary's taking a break, and if they're listening, then they can listen in. But if they're not, then I'll just say this on behalf of Mary. I listened to Mary present at the American Atheist Convention in Philadelphia in March. And as I listened to them relate their experience, and I could see there's a lot of years, as Mary shared, there's a lot of years separating Mary from the trauma of their childhood. But doesn't matter how many years are in there. When they do these presentations like this, it is, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, it's slicing open a vein and bleeding for us all to see, for all of us to participate. Let's never forget that. I am deeply grateful for the lessons that I have taken away from Mary. I'm looking forward to reading the book. But let's never forget to be grateful for the cost that it takes sometimes for these presentations. Those of us who are years out of our deconversion, there's always, you can always just transport yourself back in there. And so let's be sensitive to that. One of the things that being a volunteer at Recovering from Religion does, because we're led by Dr. Ray, who is a font of information about psychology and how to deal with this, is developing that skill set of being sensitive to another person's experience. We even have rules on our helpline. We're careful not to do a lot of self-disclosure. What's the harm in that? Why can't we just tell them their story and then they tell us our story? Well, there's a lot of reasons for it, partly because it centers the telephone call or the chat on the client. Part of it is because that's not what that's about. We have the online community where that's about that. We have this hangout that's coming up that's about that. We have our support groups that are about that. But the helpline is about being present and listening. And I have heard many volunteers say that working as a volunteer on the helpline has helped them develop the skill set that they use in other parts of their lives, that they use in their relationships, to be thoughtful before. Don't just wait for your turn to talk and blab it out. Be thoughtful, receive it, process it, give them time, give them space, and don't judge how another person is processing their own journey. Anyway, that's a lecture for another day. I am so grateful that everybody was able to make it tonight. In just a few short weeks, we are having our fall excursion. It's in Charlottesville, Virginia this year. It is September 20-something through 26 through 29, something like that. You look in the calendar and see. We still have spaces. It's a very affordable weekend. It's an awesome time. We try to minimize our screens for a little bit. We have a lot of fellowship, a lot of delicious food, a lot of laughter, a few tears maybe from time to time, presentations, talks, nature walks, guided meditation. We pack a lot into a weekend. There are several folks on this screen, as I can see in my box, that are going. We would love to have you join us. There are subsidies available. Don't let the cost keep you away. We'd love to have you join us. Everybody enjoy the hangout. Thank you for coming. We'll see you next week.